So, I was well into preparing this video essay when online provocateur Charlie Kirk was assassinated. I was appalled by the senseless and brutal act. Look, it should go without saying that nobody, no matter how odious their rhetoric, should be killed for the things they say. Now, this brutal murder could have been an opportunity for sincere reflection. Instead, it was whipped up by the right into a propaganda clickbait op to valorize Charlie Kirk as some free speech crusader. He was not that. The very function of the organization that he founded, Turning Points USA, was to squelch free speech. He most famously started a watch list targeting university professors for left-wing bias. Professors unfortunate enough to be added to that list, labeled terrorist supporters or LGBTQ, often find themselves subject to harassment, their careers threatened, even subject to physical threats and intimidation. It's a de facto blacklist. So, some free speech hero. In fact, the gimmick Kirk is most famous for, setting up a tent in a college or university, making an outrageous claim, then challenging students to prove me wrong, is not a testament to his dedication to free speech. It's an example of his disdain for good faith debate. As is the case with all con men and propagandists, the premise is a setup. He flipped the nature of honest debate on its head. In philosophical argumentation, the person making the claim is responsible for proving the claim. I form a thesis, I then use empirical, rational, and morally consistent arguments to support it. Whomever I'm debating has the job of coming up with and supporting a counter-thesis with which to evaluate and find the weaknesses in my argument. That wasn't Kirk's process. His process was exactly the opposite. Form a thesis, then insist others prove him wrong. The very nature of this setup turns debate and argumentation on its head. Edmund Davis in the Baptist News Global referred to this as a corrupted vision of the Socratic method. Davis points out, quote, "This wasn't a debate. It was propaganda repackaged as an intellectual triumph. His, quote, prove me wrong format was misleading from the start. For instance, if I claim you stole my wallet and insist that you prove me wrong, how would you do that? Let's say you try. I'll just shoot down every attempt on your part to prove me wrong. Then I'll bombard you with rapid-fire questions that you won't have time to think through. If you do come up with a good point, I'll distract by insisting you answer my question. In the end, my wallet is snug in my back pocket and you end up looking bad. Then I selectively edit the video to showcase your worst moments and post it on YouTube. That's called being owned." This is not a strategy for advancing open debate or to clarify issues. It's not doing politics the right way. It's a cynical ploy to cultivate viral clickbait. The goal is to sow confusion and doubt in the intellectual process. It shouldn't be treated as arguing in good conscience, as Edmund Davis said, quote, "Charlie Kirk's Prove Me Wrong campus tours never were about truth. They were about manufactured victories. Vulnerable students became props for viral clips." Davis referred to this as intellectual violence. And it's no coincidence that Kirk used this tactics on college campuses. Kirk was famously scornful of higher education. The Prove Me Wrong scam was custom designed not just to discredit college students, but the colleges themselves. Currently, in my home county, 3 teachers will likely be fired because of comments they made about Charlie Kirk after his death. Ironically, I've heard those who support these teachers claim that silencing debate is antithetical to Charlie Kirk's values. That's simply not true. Charlie Kirk believed in discrediting institutions like universities. The current animus toward those exercising their free speech to criticize Kirk is absolutely consistent with his overall political agenda. We shouldn't pretend otherwise. You see, Charlie Kirk wasn't a free speech warrior. Rather, he was a dedicated ideological soldier in what I'm referring to as the Four Pillars War. His goal was not to advance the cause of free speech. His intent was to further undermine the very foundations of a liberal democratic society, the notion of universal human rights, tolerance, secularism, and human dignity. The right-wing response to any attempt to remind the nation of the often hateful, bigoted, at best absurd rhetoric he brandished like a flamethrower at rational discourse is nothing more than an incendiary tool in what former Vice President Al Gore referred to as the assault against reason. That the tragic death of a polarizing figure would result in polarizing statements on both sides of the debate is predictable. That the right would then seize on sporadic social media posts to discredit public school teachers, professors, and media personalities like the Washington Post's Karen Adia is just what should have been expected. The right will not let someone rest in peace when there's an opportunity to use their death as a cluster bomb in their war against democratic norms. Kirk's death is not just a tragedy from the point of view of the right. It is a potential weapon in its war against the four pillars of liberalism. Now, when I first conceptualized and outlined this video, I was thinking of a nice half-hour informative video essay. Then Kirk was murdered and I wanted to include his role in the Four Pillars War. Then I realized I needed to elaborate some of the unfinished theory I've been working on that is informing this analysis. Things got out of hand really quick. I've had to go back and edit, and re-edit, rewrite, re-edit this script so many times, my eyes hurt. I finally decided that this essay is going to be a two-parter. In part one, I'll elaborate the historical context of what I'm referring to as the Four Pillars War. The Four Pillars War is a concerted and intentional assault against liberal institutions including government bureaucracy, the media, science and academia, and public schools. In part two, I'll talk about the contemporary process and consequences of sowing distrust in these institutions, and especially focus on the assault against public schools. Then I realized that I may very well need a part three, but we'll get to that. As always, I'll include background information on the Mad Sociologist blog and the Mad Sociologist Substack, so if you like this video essay, please subscribe to both. The coiffed Caligula's Second Reich has been a blitzkrieg against liberal institutions. The administration has intensified its assault against academic freedom, scientific research, the media, and publicly funded government data, research, and regulatory agencies. Using DEI, critical race theory, and anti-Semitism as a pretext, the Rusty Reich has threatened and sued universities and threatened to withhold federal grants. It has canceled $11 billion in research funding and has attempted to block international students from matriculating in American universities. That the likes of Charlie Kirk would focus his animus at colleges and universities is just one small part of the larger strategy in this war against rational thought. The current administration's attack on universities also plays out in our public schools, where the Orange Don is gutting the Department of Education and his MAGA minions at the state level are actively censoring curriculum, silencing teachers, dehumanizing gay and trans students, and banning books. The petri dish of this fetid, fatuous experiment and imposed ignorance is, of course, the free state of Florida, my own home school district in Robert E. Lee County. Scapegoating teachers for criticizing a right-wing hero is just another example of relentless rhetoric intended to paint public schools as indoctrination factories. Attacks against education extend to attacking science in general. Now, attacking global climate change is standard conservative fare, and being anti-vax is a new right-wing litmus test. But the gilded golem has taken this to the next level. He and his administration have savaged funding for research, including research into cancer, because he clearly wants to make malignant tumors great again. Fired thousands of scientists working for the federal government, including EPA, NOAA, CDC, and NIH. Issued a blatantly false and ideologically motivated report on climate change, and altered, censored, and blocked scientific publications. The Union of Concerned Scientists has documented over 400 attacks against science in just his first 6 months. This doubles the number of attacks against science for his entire first term. And this begs the question, why the fuck are we attacking science? Finally, Comb Over the Barbarian isn't stopping at censoring science. The invaluable information-producing institutions of the federal government are also under siege. After a negative report about unemployment, the director of the Bureau of Labor Statistics was fired. Her prospective replacement is an ideological zealot. Then there's the gutting of the CDC under the brainworm blatherer RFK Jr. Media outlets that should be bringing these dark abuses of power into the light, doing their jobs, are also under fire. Corporate media is doing what corporate media does best, namely licking the balls of those in power to guarantee shareholder profits. The failed attempt to silence Jimmy Kimmel was just the tip of the iceberg. It's not just comedians. It's journalists who might offer even a speck of criticism of this administration's trespasses. Guys like Jim Acosta and Terry Moran. CBS was sued for a bogus claim about altering an interview with Kamala Harris. The case would almost certainly have been decided in favor of CBS, but the company was in the midst of a merger negotiations that needed to be approved by the FCC. So I guess the First Amendment just has to take a back seat to shareholder interests. Oh, and we'll throw Stephen Colbert under the bus for good measure. Meantime, democracy is dying in darkness at the Washington Post. So where is all this coming from? Well, there is a model to explain exactly what the Tangerine Torquemada is up to. Back in 2009, the MAGA movement's embarrassing grandpa, radio personality Rush Limbaugh, revealed the model for this four pillars war. Let's take a closer look. In 2009, there was a huge scandal in the science of climate change. It was called ClimateGate, and it cast a shadow over all the scientific evidence about climate change ever conducted. Well, if you consumed right-wing media, that is. In fact, it was only a scandal because it was whipped into one by mouth frothers like Rush Limbaugh and then legitimized by the mainstream media for the sake of, preserving viewer shares and ratings. What happened was this. A trove of emails between climate scientists was leaked to the press. The emails were conversations between climate scientists over a span of 13 years. As one would expect, the emails contained some vetching and complaining, standard in any workplace. After all, climate science is a job like any other and no less vulnerable to office intrigue. There were a couple emails, however, when taken out of context, could be misinterpreted to indicate that climate scientists were manipulating the data on climate change to confirm the hoax that the Earth is getting warmer. One such statement was, quote, "I've just completed Mike's nature trick of adding in the real temps to each series for the last 20 years to hide the decline." That sounds bad. Unless you're familiar with climate science and understand that Mike's nature trick was a method for dealing with the well-known problem of tree ring data that does not track with other measures of global warming. Why does tree ring data not conform to other measures of global warming? Because warming is only one of many factors that influence tree ring development, so you need to control for those other factors. Regardless, the scandal was a nothing burger, just boring conversations between climate scientists. But in the hands of a master media manipulator like Rush Limbaugh, ClimateGate became the biggest scandal since OJ. It was in this context that Limbaugh defined what he called the four corners of deceit. Quote, "We live in two universes. One universe is a lie. It's deceit. It's a fraud. It's created and maintained by four corners of deceit: government, academia, science, and media." According to Limbaugh, any information coming out of these four institutions cannot be trusted. Those institutions are now corrupt. They are politicized. They are not about truth anymore. Yeah, that's right. Everyone knows that all four of those institutions are nothing but leftist propaganda to turn everyone into transgendered Marxist feminist atheists who hate America, hate men, and hate God. Where's the problem? Anyway, if the government, science, academia, and the media cannot be trusted, who can? Rush Limbaugh. Of course we can trust Rush and now all of his acolytes in the real media. We know they tell the truth because when we hear it, it validates how angry we are at everyone and everything. Let's dig a little deeper. This is a Mad Sociologist feature, so you know you're going to get the deep history. You know it's coming. buckle up, because this whole stramash doesn't start with Rush fucking Limbaugh. To get an idea of the nature of the debate we're in, let's go back to 1453. This is the year that the Ottoman Turks, under the leadership of Sultan Mehmed II, took Constantinople. Constantinople was the last vestige of the Roman Empire and a center for classical learning. Scholars fleeing Constantinople after the fall brought with them written scholarship on Aristotle, Cicero, Ptolemy, and many other philosophers from the forgotten past. They also included works from Persian and Arabic sources like Ibn Sina, Al-Farabi, Ibn al-Haytham, and others. A treasure trove of scholarship emigrated to Florence, Venice, and Genoa. This event also corresponded with one of the most important inventions in the history of mankind. A fellow named Johann Gutenberg invented a movable type printing press. This was a revolution in information technology. Literature, in the form of pamphlets, newsletters, and books, could now be reproduced in unlimited quantities at relatively low cost. This increased efficiency made it possible to spread knowledge and ideas in ways that could never be done before. This event also corresponded with the rise of an increasingly wealthy merchant class as trade routes were expanding, bringing wealth to well-positioned individuals in Europe who could now afford to buy these books and invest in art and scholarship. The confluence of these and other forces in Europe became known as the Renaissance, meaning rebirth. What was being reborn? The thinking of classical philosophers from a millennium earlier. A key idea arising from this renewed interest in philosophical scholarship became known as humanism. Scholars like Erasmus and Petrarch started writing and teaching about studia humanitatis, or human studies, what today we call the humanities. It was a rebirth of Protagoras' notion that man is the measure of all things. Humanists saw human beings as this amazing entity that could not only contemplate and shape their world, but was reflexive and capable of shaping themselves. Human beings were capable of reason that they could apply to their own experiences. Most radically, humanists believed that human beings did not need some authority, namely the church, to explain the world to them. Humans could do this for themselves by questioning as Socrates thought, and observing as Aristotle taught, and contemplating as Plato taught. I refer to this as the revolution of reason over revelation. Later thinkers like Francis Bacon, Copernicus, Newton, and Galileo, building on the scientific method developed by Ibn al-Haytham centuries earlier, started to describe the universe as it really was, as opposed to how it was presented by the church. It wasn't long before other thinkers like John Locke, Voltaire, and Rousseau applied this humanistic approach to politics, questioning the legitimacy of kings who claimed to rule by divine right when their actions often defied reason and even Christian morality. This movement became one of my favorite periods in the history of ideas, often called the Age of Enlightenment or the Age of Reason. From the point of view of the church, even the new Protestant churches and the kings who legitimized their rule by virtue of divine right, such humanistic notions were heresies. They constituted dangerous knowledge that needed to be stamped out. In 1559, the Roman Catholic Church issued the Index Librorum Prohibitorum, or the Index of Prohibited Books, banning thousands of titles, especially humanist texts. Universities were subject to state and church control. Kings all over Europe banned books and imprisoned and exiled writers like Voltaire and Denis Diderot for saying horrible stuff like, quote, "Man will never be free until the last king is strangled with the entrails of the last priest." They sentenced Galileo to lifetime home arrest and banished his scientific writings. And he was lucky. Giordano Bruno was flat out set on fire for daring to publish scientific theories that contradicted the church line. For this reason, humanist and Enlightenment thinkers were at the forefront of the first battles for freedom of speech, religious tolerance, freedom of conscience, and universal education. The application of reason, science, and critical inquiry to understanding the natural world and to our philosophies of government and human autonomy led inevitably to the rise of a new political ideology that became known as liberalism. Liberalism emphasized limited republican government based on a social contract between the state and the citizen. Liberalism flipped the notion of sovereignty from the body of the king to the body of citizens and emphasized that governments were created by the citizens for the purpose of protecting individual rights. In return, the citizens would accept some limited authority of the state. Liberals in monarchist nations demanded change, often radical change. Many of these movements fermented the revolutions that presaged the modern world, including the American Revolution, the French Revolutions, the Haitian Revolution, and the Bolivarian Revolutions, and other nationalist revolutions throughout Europe and the rest of the world in the 19th century. It turns out that humanism was, from the point of view of the churches and monarchist states, a very dangerous idea. It remains so today. Make no mistake, the world we live in today, good and bad, is the result of the unstoppable rise of liberalism in late 18th and 19th centuries. A great deal of this transformation can be credited to the evolution of liberal political philosophy, advocating actively pursuing social change for the benefit of increasing individual freedom and justice. Power was stripped, often but not always violently, from kings and embodied in the people through republican or constitutional forms of government. Also, an expanding secular liberal culture emphasized religious and cultural tolerance, even suggesting that women might maybe have a say in some things. Crazy stuff. But arguably the biggest transformations were the result of liberalism's mutual embrace of science and capitalism. By the 19th century, the fruits of scientific thinking were making their mark on the world. The driving force of civilization shifted from muscle power to machine power. Scientific advances shed light on every facet of the universe, from the Big Bang to evolution, from germ theory to quantum mechanics. Capitalists invested in these ideas and brought them to material reality. The transformation is unlike anything any species on Earth has ever experienced. Until the 19th century, more than half of all human beings died before their 40th birthday. Today, when someone dies before their 70s, we see this as a life cut short. For most of human history, even the mightiest kings never knew the luxury of air conditioning and homes free of vermin. Throughout most of human history, almost nobody could read as well as a typical fourth grader. Today, an adult who only reads at a fourth grade level is considered illiterate. It wasn't long ago that most children spent their days working in the fields or in fetid factories. Today, children are expected to be in school. The engine of this liberal transformation is fired by 4 pistons: a representative professional state, a free professional press, and a free scientific and academic inquiry. A state bureaucracy composed of professional experts, the media, and colleges and universities are the institutions established to make manifest the modern world, the liberal world order. Tangentially, I would argue that a professionalized public schooling system is the fuel that pushes all 4 of these pistons, as it is through universal education that the talent necessary to fill these institutions is developed to scale. I define these 4 pistons: professional state bureaucracies, professionalized media, research organizations, colleges and universities, and public schools as liberal institutions, because their manifest functions are to work toward improving the quality of human life, to create a freer, fairer, more knowledgeable, and more just society. They're institutions directly engaged in the progressive evolution of the social body. Furthermore, they employ rational processes, independent of any particular authority, to achieve their ends. We can contrast this to more conservative or rather traditionalist institutions such as mainstream religion, the military, and police forces. These institutions are geared toward maintaining social stability and social control. These institutions tend to be more hierarchical and demand rigid conformity to established norms and values. And I'm not saying this is a criticism. We need institutions dedicated to social order and stability. A disordered and unstable society cannot be a free society. Even within the liberal institutions mentioned above, you see traditionalist and conservative elements in how they're structured. So there's some overlap here. State bureaucracies are arguably the most small c conservative, of the four pillars. Its job is to ensure clear pathways for all the resources necessary to make the modern world function. The modern world is mind-bogglingly complex. Hey, let's just look at what it takes for you to live in a house. To live in a modern house with all the modern conveniences like electricity, plumbing, Wi-Fi, potable water, HVAC, built to safe specifications on a piece of land that is defined as yours. There are an impossible number of people who are involved in this process. A dizzying number of systems have to be working in concert for you to enjoy the comforts of living in a modern house. Magnify that by all the people in your neighborhood, your city, your state, your country, and you get an idea of the complexity of just having a house in a modern society. However, though bureaucracies are not known for their flexibility and are often rigid, their application of the rules has nothing to do with the demands of an established hierarchy. I include this as a liberal institution because its goals are mostly process-oriented. In sociological terms, they are rational or dedicated to efficiency, predictability, and standardizations. Bureaucrats get a lot of flack, but in the end, they're folks who are not driven by the goals of an authority. The goal is to make stuff work for everyone, no matter their social status. The rules apply to everyone. There are established ways for ensuring that citizens get access to clean water. It doesn't matter if the guy testing the water is liberal or conservative. It doesn't matter if the people regulating the filtration are Christians or Muslim. It doesn't matter who's in charge. It doesn't matter who's getting the water. So long as that person is following the right processes for ensuring clean drinking water. Researchers keeping an eye on the economy are dedicated to the validity of the information they share. It doesn't matter if that information makes those in power look bad. The unemployment rate is the unemployment rate, period. And it's calculated using this process, period. GDP is GDP. This is the number. Done. Indeed, when an authority does try to impose itself on the process, the nerds rise up. According to the New York Times, these data geeks get pretty cranky when the powers that be try to mess with their spreadsheets. President Obama's director of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, Erica Grosjean, informed the Times that when she tried to, quote, liven up the language of the monthly jobs report, she was resisted. Quote, the Bureau staff insisted that the agency's job wasn't to say whether the glass was half full or half empty, only to report that it is an 8-ounce container with 4 ounces of liquid. No level of democratic Republican governments is possible without a free media bound by professional ethics. The free press is not just necessary for popular participation in the political process. People need access to free and reliable information just to get through their everyday lives. I live in South Florida. I need to know when a hurricane's coming. The media provides that information, often using data they get from professional government agencies. After that hurricane blows through, I rely on the media to let me know where to get access to supplies and relief if I need it. On the other hand, a democratic society needs its media to have an adversarial relationship with established power. We need to know when those we entrust with leadership positions in a democracy are abusing that trust. Woodward and Bernstein's takedown of the Nixon administration is the archetype of this kind of adversarial relationship. As the character E.K. Hornbeck said in Inherit the Wind, quote, it is the newspaper's duty to bring comfort to the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. We can and should debate the limits of this, but democratic government is not possible without this adversarial approach. Science is central to modern life. I'm creating this commentary using tools derived from diverse sciences, from electrical engineering to quantum physics and everything in between. There isn't a fragment in my life that isn't in some way influenced by scientific innovation, from the food I eat to the clothes that I wear. This scientific influence is fairly new to human history and is the direct result of scientific free inquiry and state investments in the advancement of science. And academia is where the big questions about the human condition are asked and answered. And then the answers subject to further questioning. The very notions of freedom, rights, and equality are notions developed and evolved by academics playing with ideas and then hashing out their theories in a hostile academic environment until the strongest ideas gain traction. Academia drives scientific and technological innovation, but It also drives social and cultural innovation. It's the academics who force us to contend with the complexities of human dignity and diversity and shatter the comfortable illusions and popular delusions manifest in our stereotypes. Academia, if free to do so, pushes the boundaries of human freedom. Public education is where all of this starts. A growing society requires a growing pool of talent. The only way to cultivate that talent, to fulfill our desire for experts and scientists, writers, artists, musicians, plumbers, and HVAC techs, and all the myriad skills necessary to make modern life possible, it all happens in public schools, staffed by professional educators, free to help every student develop their maximum human potential. The modern world that we enjoy is the legacy of the successes of the liberal movement as an ideological project. Liberal humanist principles such as universal human rights, limited government, secularism, reason, and, yes, capitalism were ascendant for 200 years. They culminated in the fall of absolute monarchy and the rise of constitutional and republican government, and the industrial and scientific revolutions of the 19th and 20th centuries. These liberal advances did not happen in a vacuum. Liberalism as an ideology had to vie with competing ideas, namely leftism or socialism and conservatism. Since the French Revolution, conservative movements have served to apply the brakes to liberal reforms for the sake of maintaining social stability to greater or lesser effect. The conservative movements did this by emphasizing traditional norms and values, making the case that too much change happening too fast can lead to instability. This was often frustrating to leftists and left-leaning liberals who were invested in more radical or immediate reform. On the other hand, leftist movements like the socialist and labor movements were instrumental in challenging the liberal status quo by emphasizing democracy and equality and fighting against capitalist exploitation. Leftist movements expanded the voting franchise to include all adults. Leftists ended slavery. Because of leftist movements, we have child labor laws, public goods like sanitation. We have regulations on corporate largesse so we can feel safe that the medicines we take will actually help us. The food we eat won't poison us. We have social safety nets, Social Security, and Medicare. It was the left fighting for 8 hours to work, 8 hours to sleep, 8 hours to do as we wished. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, it was leftists pushing liberals to fill in some of the cracks that so many working people were falling through. The left-liberal coalition culminated in the New Deal and ushered in the most equitable and prosperous generation in American history, the post-war generation. The next step was to expand these benefits to all people, to women, to racial, ethnic, and gender minorities, to immigrants. After all, human rights are human rights. For those on the political right, from mainstream conservatism to the reactionary right, this was a step too far. Attempts to build a great society addressing the inequities of American liberalism caused a backlash. The American right was galvanized to undermine American liberalism and the liberal world order in ways they were unable to do since the turn of the 20th century. If the goal is to undermine liberal society and all that goes with it, universal rights, limited government, reason, secularism, and tolerance, then the first step must be to undermine the institutions propping this system up. That means undermining state bureaucracies, or just government in conservative lingo, the media, science, and academia, and most importantly, public education. Part 2 of this video series will look at this assault against the pillars of liberalism, what I'm calling the Four Pillars War.